Hi everyone, John from RCD. Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to a pre-flight review and build video for the new Parkzone Mosquito Mk VI. This bind and fly model comes in at $250. I will be doing the optional retracts and optional flaps. So let's go ahead and take a look at the specs, the back of the box real quick, and then get everything out of the box and go on with the build. And just a quick look at the back of the box, which really shows the model nicely. We'll go ahead and look at the specs real quick. We do have two 370 brushless outrunner motors at 1300 kV, two 18 amp brushless ESCs, the Spectrum AR610 DSM2 DSMX receiver, and you do need to supply the transmitter, charger, and battery with the bind and fly model. I'll be using 3S2200 milliamp packs and the DX18 radio. And just to round out the accessories that I will be using with the airplane, these are the 10 to 15 size electric main landing gear retracts. These are part number EFLG 100. Flap servos, SV80 long lead wire servos, PKZ 1081. And if you do want to do retracts, you should have the retract landing gear strut set, PKZ 6323. This should be in the box. This set was not in the box, so Horizon did send them out right away. So just make sure you have this set because you will need it for the retracts. And I just want to give you guys a real quick look at everything in the box. It's packed really well. Just a fantastic looking airplane. We're going to go ahead and unpack everything and get this thing built. As with all Parkzone models, the DH98 Mosquito Mk VI comes with some very nice instructions. Recommend you give them a pre-read before you start building. And we can just quickly go over the remainder of the specs. 49-inch wingspan, 37.6 inches in length, and all-up weight with flaps and retracts is 44.4 ounces, 42.3 without. As you can see, there aren't too many small parts that come with the plane, but as usual, I like to put those in a separate little container just so everything stays together. I don't lose anything. We are going to do the retracts first, and it looks like originally in the instructions they had you make the retract strut from the original fixed gear strut by taking it apart and adding a different piece to it. But somewhere along the way they changed their mind on that because, as I mentioned, now you have the PKZ 6323 part, which is the already assembled retract strut. So this is what you'll need. If you're not going to do the retracts, of course you'll use these. Otherwise you can just set these aside. And let's go ahead and install the retracts. First step for the retracts is pretty straightforward. Just take off the landing gear cover, held on by 3 screws, 2 in the front, 1 in the back, and the landing gear plate, which is held on with 4 screws in there. This is what it looks like once you've taken those off. And you have the plastic holder here for the retracts. Save the screws because you will need them. The rear screw on the landing gear cover is set in pretty deep, so I actually found it kind of helpful to use a flashlight just to make sure that I could get in there and get the screwdriver on it correctly. We are almost ready to put the retracts into the plane. Just take out these 2 grub screws on either side to remove the stock strut, and then just simply replace that with the retract strut with the wheel on it. Just make sure that that is nice and straight. You don't want it turning to either side. You want to have nice ground handling, so you want to make sure that's nice and straight with the retract, and then put those 2 grub screws back in there, tighten things up, and you're ready to put the retract into the airplane. So you want to use the long Y harness that comes with the retracts and feed one end of that through the aileron slot into the retract compartment so you can hook up the retract. So it looks like it's going to be pretty close with that Y connector that came with the retracts. It should be long enough, but I might need an extension. I'll let you know that. With these type of connectors like this, I always like to add a little bit of tape just for that little extra security. So just take some electric tape like this, little strip, and just wrap it around where it connects there just to have a little bit more solid connection, not have to worry about it. All right, so before I put in the other retract, I decided I might as well just attach the wings because I have to fish that Y harness through this side anyway, so good a time as any to put the wings on. Easy enough, just put the carbon fiber spar in there, slide the wing on, just make sure all your leads are going through the channels and are clear. In the front you have the ESC lead and the EC3 connector. In the back you have the aileron lead and the flap lead coming through there. Make sure they're clear of the fuselage so everything fits nicely. And then once it's fit on, all you have to do is put a single screw right into here to attach the wing, and that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and get the other wing on and then fish that Y harness hopefully back through here. I don't think it'll be too hard, and get the retract on this side done, and then we'll be able to go ahead and do the flaps. All right, the wings are both on, the retracts are in. I just want to mention a couple things before we move on to the flaps and the tail, which will pretty much finish the model. Once I put the wings on, there's a lot of wires that go in there, a lot of things to connect. So I went ahead and bound the model before I started putting a lot of stuff in there just to get that out of the way. And as soon as I put the wings on, put the wing bolt in there. There's the wing bolt. You can see it down there, one on each side. That's something you can forget to do. You could think maybe I'll just do it later. If you forget that, your wings are going to fly off. And that's never a fun thing to have happen to a brand new plane. So as soon as those wings go on, make sure you put that wing bolt in. This is not a really big model, so it should fit in the car, no problem. Plus there's so many leads and wires, I don't think you'd really want to be taking the wings off anyway, just too much work to put everything back in. The retracts work fine. As far as that Y connector goes, I couldn't get the larger end from the fuselage through that wing channel back to the nacelle. That was just too big. I think the channel is just too small there. So I did end up running another lead back through the other way to get it connected. No problem though, they both work, they look great, and added a little air scoops there in the front. Little detail just bolts in with a little screw right there. So that's it. All that's left now is the flaps. There's the flap pocket right there. And then the tail, we'll go ahead and set that up. The tail really does not require much work at all. The vertical stabilizer and rudder are already attached with the control horn set up, push rod in place. That's completely done. You just need to do the horizontal stabilizer and elevator. Slide in the carbon fiber spar here. Each half just goes in. It's real simple. And there's a plastic piece in the back to join the elevator halves. Once you have that in place, little sticky tapes go on the front and back, bottom and top, and that secures things in place. There's not a lot of force to pull this out, so that's all you really need. If you're kind of old school like me, you'll probably glue it because I'm just so used to doing that. The nice thing about the tape is that if you damage the horizontal stabilizer either in a crash or just getting it in and out of your car, you can easily replace it. You can just take the tape off, pop the part out, put a new part in, and nice and clean. Whereas if it's glued, you're going to have to re-glue it in. It's not going to be as pretty, but you can still fix it that way. So once this is in place, all you have to do is hook up the clevis to the control horn, and that's it for the tail. Well, it turns out with the flap servo wire already installed in the airplane as it comes, using that SV80 long lead servo leaves a lot of extra wiring. Not a big problem though, just go ahead and pull it through the flap channel into the fuselage. The radio compartment is plenty big to handle the extra wiring, and the servo pocket is perfectly sized for that SV80 servo, so that will fit in there just nice and flush and perfect. So before you do that, before you put the arm on the servo, make sure that you turn the radio on, plug in the battery, and center the servos. That basically just means, turning everything on, making sure they work, and then having them in the up position. So when they're in the up position, you can go ahead and then put the arms on. The instructions show you how to put the arm on, what position it should be in, and then you'll be ready to install the flap servo. You can either use double-sided sticky tape or hot glue. I'm probably going to use just a little dab of epoxy. That's what I usually do. You can still remove the servo, scrape it off if you want to use it later, but I know that way it'll be completely secure, so that's the way I'll do it. One more last thing you want to do before you install that servo into the pocket is make sure that the flap is moving in the right direction, that the servo arm is moving in the right direction. So, the flap is back there. It should be pulling it in that direction, going that way. So we'll just confirm that, pulling the flap down, now pushing the flap back up. Because if it needs to be reversed, if it's going the wrong direction, that servo arm is probably going to swing around into some funny, weird position, and you'll have to reattach it. So you don't have to take the servo back out to do that. Make sure everything is working, going in the right direction before you install that servo. So I did run into a small issue when I went to install the flap control horn. It uses these long screws and a back plate that goes on top of the flap. Well, it turns out the front screw that has to go through the thicker part of the flap is just flush with the top of the flap, so it actually cannot screw into this back plate. The back one reaches long enough, but the front one doesn't quite make it. So the back plate is gray. It's on the green surface on the front side, so it doesn't look that great. So instead, I'm just going to, you guessed it, epoxy it in. I'm going to use some smaller screws I just had on hand just to give the control horn a little bit more bite in there. But I'm just going to glue them basically and just glue that whole thing in just like that. And it will definitely stay. It won't be any problem. And the top of the flap won't have that back plate on it. It'll look a little bit better. And that screw just doesn't reach anyway. So that's just a small issue, but no problem. Glue always saves the day. I do recommend that you install the flap push rod on each side before you cut the flaps free There's a little bit of foam in a couple places right there and right there that you need to cut out in order to free the flaps so that they can move. But if you put the control rod, the push rod there on first, the flaps will be in a locked position. They'll be even on each side, and you can make sure that things are set up nicely. So get those push rods on and then go ahead and cut the flaps free. Again, I'm going to use that surgical blade to do that. That's really the last step. This plane will be ready to go. I've got the 3-cell 2200 milliamp lithium polymer all the way in the front of the nose, and it looks like the CG is right on. You can see that it's just behind that nacelle right there, right at the back part of it, and that looks like where you want it per the instructions, so I think we're pretty good. Well, the foam has been cut out and the flaps are free. I've also finished the radio setup. Everything is ready to go. There's the flaps operating. I've got a 2-second slowing on the flap servos through the radio, just so they don't pop down too quickly. As far as the rest of the control surfaces, everything is set up pretty much per the manual. I have added a little bit of expo onto the aileron, elevator, and rudder just to smooth things out a little bit. And we're basically ready to fly. So right now I'm just going to take the airplane outside, just do a little more video of the details of the plane, show the retracts and flaps again, and then we'll be ready to fly. So as always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, please give a thumbs up or subscribe. I always really appreciate that. Any comments or questions below, I'll try to answer them. And the flight video will be coming up. I can't wait to fly this plane.